Bonjour.
Hello.
Nous allons continuer
We are going to continue exploring the new functions available within Edius 10 concerning motion tracking. But first, I'd like to advise you to make sure that you have the latest version of Edius 10 installed. At the time of recording of this video, the latest version is Edius 10.10. So I'll be using this version in our examples. Version 10.10 has the following functions included. The option Render and Add to Timeline is back. You can add thumbnails to sequence markers, which speeds up the work and makes you find things much more easily on the timeline. And there are new options for motion tracking. So ready for tracking? Let's go.
C'est parti! Bienvenue à nouveau donc dans le studio.
Welcome back to the studio. This time we will cover a little bit of motion tracking.
Je vous ai préparé quelques
I have prepared some examples for you, and with them we will see in detail how to achieve some of these results.
et puis je voulais aussi
And I would also like to mention that the sources I use in this example are partly ProRes LT 4K 50p files. So they are quite large files and a lot to handle, which is why from time to time I switch to proxy files to have more flexibility in the editing process. So let's go.
Alors je vais vous enlever la partie d'incrustation avec
So first of all, I'm going to disable the on-screen display status for more visibility. I click Ctrl-G on the keyboard, or I can simply deactivate the option Status on the on-screen display. Now it is deactivated. I'm going to work with proxy files because the original files are large.
Donc ça, ce sont les rushs réalisés avec le drone dont je vous parlais.
So these are the clips made with the indoor drone, with a mini drone. The source is 1080 50p.
Voilà pour les exemples que je vous ai concoctés.
So these are the examples that I have put together for you. Now we will see some of them in detail to see how it goes with the tracking. We're going to start with a very simple tracking. So we're going to leave this one to one side because the technique is the same on these clips. We're going to take this clip and you will see how I created the motion tracking with it. The previous examples are made the same way, so we will simply copy the clip. So I click on the clip and move it, and just before releasing it, I press the Control key. That way, the clip is duplicated. And so, I'll do the same thing here. So that's done. And then, I'll open the layouter.
Alors, ce qu'il faut savoir avec le tracking, que ce soit...
So this is what we need to know about tracking. Here, we're going to track specifically an object, but in previous versions of Edius, the tracking was done via the mask filter. There is already a podcast on this topic, and it is subject to Edius tutorials. so I won't cover this again right now. But we will have a look at the tracking of objects, and you will see how to attach something to a tracked object and have it follow the movement within the image. So we won't select the source image, we'll simply do it on the object. Okay, so now we'll reinitialize everything. Here we are. So the important thing when starting to do a tracking is, on the one hand, to choose what we are going to follow and to choose the right moment to organize our tracking.
L'exemple ici est assez typique. Si je me mets au début,
so the example here is somewhat typical. Here, at the beginning, we have a slightly blurry image. So I'm not sure how I can use this, or how Edius will handle it. The idea is that the title should follow the movement of the saw. But so if I choose a frame like this, I can use it because the image is sharp. Now I'll go to the Tracking tab and choose Chase Mode. The image to track appears in the window, and I will simply go and place the small square on the area I want to follow and adjust its size.
Le dimensionner, éventuellement l'orienter. Mais pour l'instant, on va rester très simple.
For the moment, we will keep it very simple. So this is done. Now here, you see that the cursor is not at the start of the timeline, nor at the end. It's practically in the middle of the layouter's timeline. So at this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you that the motion tracking can be applied in the layouter or via a filter found in the effects list. It's in the transform filter, but we'll cover this later. So here, I can tell Edius to track either forwards or backwards. So here, I have track forwards or track backwards. But since the cursor is in the middle of the timeline, I will track forwards first. So here, Edius will detect the movement of the object in the section that I have asked it to follow. You see that sometimes there is a small gap, but the tracking is performed extremely well. So this is done.
Je vais revenir sur mon point de départ. Et à partir de ce point de départ, je vais lui demander de faire le suivi vers l'arrière.
So now I'll go back to our starting point, and I'll also track backwards from there.
Parfois, on n'est pas.
The reason I do this is because sometimes the first image is not ideal for tracking. Sometimes, for example, the object is outside the frame at the start of the clip. Therefore, we can go anywhere on the layouter timeline and start tracking forwards and then backwards. Of course, going back to the starting point in between these processes.
Le carré suit bien.
So here we can see that the square is indeed at the center of the saw, and that the title has also been positioned right on the center of the saw. It follows the movement perfectly.
Alors, super.
So, excellent. We're very happy with this.
Mais maintenant, on veut pas forcément que,
It works extremely well, but we don't necessarily want the title to be placed right in the center. So I'm simply going to modify the position of the anchor of my title.
de mon titre. Je vais aller sur encore.
I do this by repositioning the anchor on the X and Y scale.
Et sa position en Y.
So I adjust its position.
Alors je choisis l'axe comme centre, hein, mais ça aurait pu être autre chose. Pour cet exemple-là, c'est fini.
So for this example, we're done.
Alors, autre chose.
And now another
Là,
example.
on va juste l'utiliser pour...
But for this example, we're going to use it for rotation.
Alors, on va le dupliquer.
So,
Tac.
we're going to duplicate it right away.
Voilà, je réinitialise tout.
Then, I'll reset
Et en
everything.
fait, ce qui est intéressant dans cet exemple-là, c'est qu'on va
So
pouvoir
what's interesting in this example
rotation.
is that we can also rotate the
Petite
object.
présentation.
The motion tracker in the layouter allows the rotation of an object and the variation in its scale to be tracked as well.
Donc, je retourne dans suivi. Je reviens
So I go
sur
back to tracking and chase mode.
Cette fois-ci, je vais
This
prendre-
time I'm going to focus on the center bar.
Voilà, je vais tout de suite là. Donc voilà, vous voyez là, par contre, je l'ai bien
So here you can see
de ma
that I
timeline
start the tracking at the beginning of the timeline
parce que ça correspond pile
because it
poil
matches
à ce que je veux
exactly
faire.
with what I
Et
want
là,
to
donc,
do.
du coup, je fais suivi vers l'avant. Pour
So
l'instant,
now I'll do some forwards tracking, but for the minute nothing changes.
voilà, alors là, Edius m'annonce qu'il ne peut
So
plus
whilst tracking
les
forwards,
caractéristiques différentes
Edius
nécessaires, c'est-à-dire,
claims
en fait,
that it can no longer detect
que l'on lui
the
a
object.
demandé de suivre,
And that's true, because the object is no longer visible in the image. So of course it cannot be tracked anymore. But no problem, we don't need to track the object that far anyway. Instead, I'd like to add some rotation. So I'm going to right-click on the tracking square and choose Apply Tracking, and then Rotation. So Apply Tracking, Rotation.
Et là, du coup, on a une rotation effectivement qui s'opère.
And so there we have a rotation that takes place. But that's not what I have in mind at all.
C'est au moment, voilà, où on arrive en fin de rotation. Je voudrais que mon
In fact, what I would like is for my title to be horizontal and readable.
Donc là, en fait, tout simplement, je
But
vais
that's easy to do.
la rotation. Donc là,
So I'm
si on
going
regarde
to
sur
change
Z,
the rotation. So this is the Z rotation.
Donc voilà, déjà, on va déjà le placer comme ça. Et ensuite, on va changer l'ancrage. Alors moi, j'ai pris l'habitude de...
And so here,
de tracking.
I'll
Quand
change
on fait un
the
tracking, de
anchoring.
changer l'ancrage.
I'm used to working in motion tracking,
La position fonctionne aussi. C'est juste une habitude que j'ai prise.
so I have the habit of repositioning the anchor from here.
Plus tard, mais a priori, non.
I hope this is not a bad habit,
Alors après, on peut mettre aussi des points.
but later we can also use keyframes to change the anchor over time, because sometimes you just want to make micro adjustments. In fact, this is what we'll have to do here.
Faire pivoter, et déjà, je crée des points clés à cet endroit-là.
I add some keyframes,
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on a?
and then we can see what we have.
Ah, on a des petits réajustements à faire.
So we have some small adjustments we need to do.
On va juste le faire partir.
The start isn't particularly good.
Voilà, c'est parce
It's
que
not the
le
tracking which
départ
isn't
n'est
good.
pas- n'est pas
It's
bon.
simply that the starting position of the title
N'est pas bon, c'est
is not in the right place.
d'orientation de départ du titre.
So we're going to fix this right away.
Donc ça, on va faire ça tout de suite. On revient sur l'outil de présentation.
We come back to the layouter.
Donc là, je peux, voilà, le fait d'avoir mis des points,
Here,
c'est-à-dire aussi que je peux
I can
faire des
see my
corrections,
keyframes,
pour
and
pouvoir
I can make
affiner.
small corrections
Là, on est sur
and
un
refine the
terrain
tracking,
assez compliqué à suivre, hein.
because this is somewhat complicated
C'est bien
footage.
de voir justement,
So it's good to see when things aren't necessarily going perfectly well.
affiner les choses.
It's important to see how we can refine the tracking when it's not
Ce que je voulais
perfect.
vous montrer aussi, c'était le côté,
What I also wanted to show you now
aussi
was how to
appliquer,
change the proportion.
l'effet sur l'échelle.
So we are able to change the scale of the tracked object.
Voilà, donc là, on se retrouve avec quelque chose de tout petit.
So as we can see, it's very small at the end.
Moi, j'y-
But I'd
ici,
like it to be the
soit
opposite.
assez gros.
It should be big enough here.
Donc pareil, je vais dans...
So I have to stretch
Je
it.
vais activer mes points clés
I activate the keyframe for stretching.
Voilà.
And here it is.
Et du coup, on voit que, nickel,
we see that the proportion is well applied to the object.
Donc, voilà comment fonctionne le suivi.
This is how motion tracking works in chase mode. Now we will have a look into the other tracking mode. It's the anchor mode.
Ancré. Alors, à quoi ça sert?
So how does this work?
Justement, j'ai un plan.
So here, I have a scene we created specifically for this, where I move from left to right.
Pour pouvoir, justement, vous montrer.
Which is perfect to show you how anchor mode can be best used. So as you see, I move from left to right. The only problem is that in fact I need to embed and position this person properly in the screen. We saw the example at the very beginning of the video. This is quite simple. I go back to a point in the video where the object was not yet visible.
Voilà. Et là, je vais aller dans Suivi.
There you are.
Et cette fois-ci,
and now I'm going to follow. But this time, I will not take chase mode.
Ancré.
I will use anchor mode. So I'm going to use my face as a point of reference.
Comme point de référence. Et là, vous voyez, je me suis mis au milieu, donc encore une
And there you can see that I'm in the middle of the timeline. So I'm going to do some forward tracking.
Puis,
and then I return to the center of the timeline, my starting point, and I'll do some backward tracking.
Hop. Alors, vous avez vu dans les options que l'on dispose.
You may also have seen in the options that we have the possibility to perform tracking image by image. It lets us make small corrections on complicated movements. So now I suggest we look at the initial results.
Donc on voit que je suis ancré.
And we can see that I am anchored in the center of the image. So you see, I've managed to keep myself in the center, and there is no movement anymore. This is very practical if we have to broadcast, or if we have to edit content for social media in a square format, or for other purposes.
Alors, la seule chose, c'est que là, quand même,
The only problem is that due to the tracking, I was automatically shifted down in the picture. But with the layouter, I can just readjust my position upwards.
Vers le haut, et normalement, en une fois, on devrait être calé.
So there we are. That seems fine to me.
Je vois pas très bien. Oui, c'est bon. Donc là, effectivement.
So there, indeed, it's perfect.
Alors, forcément, les mouvements ont l'air un petit peu bizarres, hein, c'est logique, parce que moi, pendant ce temps-là, je bougeais de gauche à droite. Donc en fait, ça peut paraître bizarre, mais au moins, je reste bien.
So obviously, the movements look a little bit weird.
Donc, mission réussie. Maintenant, vous allez vous dire, bah oui, mais d'accord, ok, il a ancré.
So the task with anchor mode was successful. But now you might ask yourself, okay, he anchored the object, but how can we combine both anchor and chase mode? Well, it's quite simple. We will use a specific effect. It's a filter that allows you to track. It's the transform filter.
Filtre vidéo.
So I go to Effects, Video Filters, and I'm going to drag the transform filter onto the clip that I want to insert into the image. Now, I'll double-click on the filter, and I click on Tracking, and we see that the clip is not filling out the frame. At first, I can crop my image a little bit to avoid having these borders. I click on Crop, and crop the video. Then I click on Chase Mode
Encore une fois, je vais trouver un moment
and search for a moment where the object can be seen straight and very clear.
et bien clair. Hop. Et donc là, encore une fois, je vais faire un suivi
Here it
vers
is.
l'avant,
And so
un suivi
again,
vers l'arrière.
I'm going to track forwards and backwards.
Je reviens sur mon point d'origine.
I come back to my start point.
Donc là, forcément,
And there once again, my object,
est sorti
the small monitor,
du cadre.
came out of the frame
Et donc,
and
si
cannot
je
be
reviens,
detected.
on a déjà
But it's okay.
une
Our
première
first
approche
stage is
du
done.
mouvement. Maintenant, je vais réduire la taille de l'élément.
Now I'll reduce the size of the clip
Changer
and change the anchor a bit in its height. With Y
dont il va se placer sur la hauteur avec
and
le
in its
Y
width with
et sur la
X.
largeur avec le X. Et là déjà, si je fais lecture, il me semble qu'on est
And now,
sur le suivi.
if I play it, it doesn't seem too bad.
Je n'ai pas
The
l'orientation.
only problem is that I need to fix the orientation, and so I have to apply the rotation.
La rotation.
So I'll right-click
Apply tracking, rotation.
and apply tracking,
Voilà, c'est
rotation,
magie.
and there you go. It's a bit like magic.
Alors, bien sûr, on a un point un
Of course, it's a bit more complicated if I flip the screen towards me. There would be a way to take control of the orientation to make it run in 3D and make it disappear when I turn the screen. We could optimize this without any problem directly within Edius. But the goal isn't to show you that, knowing that I still have a small bonus to show you.
Je vous emmène réaliser donc.
I'll show you how to achieve this effect, made based on tracking, and above all, we will see some software. Software that I don't mention too much, but I use all the time, and it's a paid plugin from Edius, which is called vititle. It lets us make, amongst other things, this famous round title. So let's start. So we'll start again from the beginning, so that we can see a little bit of vititle. We'll deactivate this one, and we'll start from scratch. So when I do a title, I right-click on the track on which I want to see the title. There are plenty of ways to create titles, but that's how I do it. I always have my background when I need it, so it's very handy. And so here we are. We find ourselves in vititle.
Voilà. Alors on va organiser un petit peu.
So we're going to organize a little bit.
Donc déjà pour être sûr de faire un joli rond, je vais
To make sure it will be an accurate circle, I will already start drawing a circle within the interface, or even the software.
Donc je sélectionne dans Objet, je sélectionne une ellipse.
I select an ellipse,
Et ici, je vais commencer à dessiner mon ellipse. Et
and here I'll start drawing my ellipse. And to be sure that it is a perfect circle, I press the Control key. So here, I'm going to center it by clicking on H, by pressing H on the keyboard. And now I will use the text rounding function. So rounding the text in vititle already creates a path for the text. In fact, it will make a path on which the text will go. So it can be a circle, or it can in fact be any shape. It's very interesting to place a title on a geometric shape when we have an image. And there, I make my first point. And then, of course, I pull my vectors, which we can, of course, modify later.
commencer par faire les 4 points et on fera l'ajustement après. Ok.
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 Ok. Alors, c'est pas grave, on
Okay.
fera les ajustements de vecteurs après.
For now it's okay. We'll redo the vector adjustments afterwards. And now I'll enter the text.
Oui, j'avais écrit en majuscule.
But I think I'll write it in capitals. It's somewhat prettier.
Des-
Parade des bateaux.
je sais pas pourquoi j'ai mis un... C'est pas un château, c'est un bateau. Parade des bateaux. Tac. À Binic.
Binic.
Étable.
Étable sur mer.
Et un espace, un tiret, un espace. Alors pour l'instant, tout le texte n'apparaît pas, mais c'est pas grave.
For the minute, not everything appears correctly, but it's not so important right now.
Mes arrondis, hein, optimiser mes arrondis.
So now I'll click on my points to adjust my text rounding, to optimize my rounding.
Tout va bien, par contre,
So there we have my circle,
tout mon texte qui apparaît.
and everything appears fine. On the other hand, well, the text isn't all visible. So I'll double-click to modify, I'll do Control-A, and I'll simply reduce the size of my characters. And so the circle is finished. We have our rounded title. Now I just have to delete the white circle, so I'll select it on the screen, and I have the impression it's selected. But if I delete the title. Why? Because in fact, this title will select what's in the foreground. So I have a little manipulation to do. And so, by right-clicking, I can choose to move it to the back, or behind, or to the front or top. And this time, seeing that it is my white circle that is in the foreground, I was able to select and delete. And so the next step is to save automatically or save as in Edius, as I choose. And so I have my title. Everything is fine. So now I simply adjust the length to the length I wish it to be. And now I'll just finish off using the normal methods. I think that we can start at the beginning, and so I'll select my boat.
C'est quand même très agréable, hein. Cet outil.
So it's a very nice tool to work with. We already knew that the motion tracking tool was extremely well implemented in Edius, thanks to the masking tool, which has been available in Edius since version 8. We saw that the arrival of movement tracking in the mask already made it possible to achieve many things, and here they have managed to implement it extremely well.
Très qualitative. Donc voilà,
So here we have the tracking being carried out. I mean the movement tracking. So as we can see, we have a result which is not bad at all.
est pas mal. Alors, bon, la seule chose, c'est que je voudrais qu'il ait plus...
So the only thing is that I would like it to give us the impression that it is positioned flat on the sea. And to achieve this, I'm going to adjust my X position. We must have the impression, using value X, that it is positioned correctly.
On a un peu plus l'impression de... qu'il est posé, on verra si...
And we can see if it's necessary to make it evolve over time to help achieve this.
Faire un point clé
So here, I will already make a keyframe
sur la valeur X.
on the X value.
Alors, je pense qu'on peut...
And now I think I can reduce the stretch a little bit, the size, so that we have the impression that it is actually circling the boat.
Voilà, et maintenant, je voudrais faire tourner le titre.
And now I'd like to rotate the title around the boat. So here, I'm not going to use the motion tracking model,
Comme modèle, je vais
but I'll do the rotation myself, so that we have good readability of the entire title.
Donc là, c'est le Z.
So this is the Z-axis,
Et on va aller au bout.
and we will go to the end.
parade des bateaux. Voilà,
and then we'll perhaps not make it perform a complete circle, otherwise it will move a little bit too fast. I think this will leave enough time to read it properly, so let's see what happens.
Pas mal.
Not bad. So it's nice to have this kind of tool in your editing software. Well, I've been using Edius for some time, and I admit that I've already known about it for quite a while. When you know the filters well, you do not need any additional software. And it's true that in addition to this, the updates make the software more powerful anyway. So a lot of effects can be done internally within the software itself. So I'm not saying everything can be done, but there are certainly a lot of options.
Ce deuxième épisode à la découverte d'Edius 10.
This second episode of Discovering Edius 10 is over, and I hope it was able to answer some of your questions. If you want to install Edius 10, you should know that you must have a machine with a 4th generation Intel CPU or a recent AMD processor. Now, if you want to acquire Edius, it's certainly not free software, but it is software that brings many interesting things in terms of speed, ease, and flexibility of work. It's an investment which is very interesting. There is an educational license and a pro license, along with a work group license. To find all the information concerning these licenses, contact your reseller or go to the edius.net website. And so this episode ends here, but I hope to meet you for the next episode. In that video, we will cover background rendering and exporting in the background. Until then, I wish you good editing, excellent films, and see you soon.
À bientôt.